Today, I'll tell you about one of the most unique pianists in history, Vladimir de Pachmann, born in 1848 in Odessa, nowadays Ukraine, hometown of many great performers, including Richter and Gilel Slater. When you listen to Pachmann, you don't just hear a pianist, you hear a personality, a poet, a bit of a genius, and sometimes, to be honest, a bit of a madman, especially if you read countless anecdotes from his life and his interviews. I'll share with you the most delicious bits about him which I found. Pachmann was not only unique at the piano, he was extravagant in life. At 25, he retired for 8 years because he felt he was not good enough. When he returned, he decided he still needed 2 more years to practice. He claimed he never performed a piece publicly until he had practiced it 10,000 times. Some pieces, by Leopold Godowsky, for example, whom he adored, he supposedly practiced 13,000 times and still did not feel ready to play them in public. But before we start, I'm happy to announce that you still have a chance to get some of my courses at a great discount, so check the info in the description. Let's take this legendary Pachmann's recording of the first Etude by Frédéric Chopin. This performance is so different from the athletic, high-voltage way we usually hear this piece today. Pachmann plays it in a lyrical, bel canto style. It almost feels sung rather than played. Of course, the recording quality is extremely poor and we must be careful making a judgment about his color palette and stuff. Early recordings distort dynamics and color, and we don't even realize how much it influences our perception of an interpretation. But even through the noise, it feels like he never goes beyond a gentle forte. There is just one forte, and there is no storm, no drama, no heroic tension. Instead, it feels like a romantic tribute to Bach's C major prelude from Well-Tempered Clavier Book 1, a delicate sound picture made of light and shade. However, I'm not saying that this is the only right way how it must be played, as many people say in comments. Great pieces survive because they allow different interpretations. And even if today's dramatic and brilliant renditions are not authentic, not how Chopin himself envisioned his piece, it doesn't mean they have no right to exist, in my opinion. The paradox of music is that the creator has no power over a piece and how it evolves through centuries, and how differently it may be interpreted. So Pachmann's approach does not cancel modern ones, for me personally. It simply shows another possibility, and that is what's beautiful. What makes him so unique is not just softness of touch, it is nobility and fantasy in his artistic approach. Here is what he wrote about the first Etude by Chopin. The very first one is among the harmonical wonders of the world. Whenever I play it, it conjures up the picture of some exquisitely beautiful little child being bathed in a silver bath filled with milk and wine amid brightly colored, richly scented flowers. Just let's pause for a moment and admire this imagination. A silver bath, milk and wine, scented flowers. With my most ambitious students, I constantly ask them, what exactly is this moment about? Not just a general mood like cheerful or sad. Name me a color, name me a temperature, a smell, a gesture. And I don't let them escape with vague, generic words like, oh, this is a sad piece or this is a cheerful piece. No, we want to understand what is exactly painted here. And here, Pachmann gives us a masterclass in artistic imagination. If you want to tell a story in music, your inner world must be this detailed. Listen carefully to how he begins each passage, because he slightly broadens the first beat. And then he returns to tempo. And then he also marks the second beat. And it feels like speech, like breathing before a phrase. Part of this comes from his very special fingering for this etude, published in the London Ogner edition, which is available on IMSLP. So I really suggest you to take a look. And it was connected to his obsession with minimal motion. And he was so devoted to this method that he openly admitted if a piece required movements that did not fit his system, he simply wouldn't play it. He said, "I work for months to invent new fingerings, not for simplicity, but to manipulate the keys so that I may express the musical thought as it ought to be expressed." And this is truly fascinating. He did not invent fingerings to make life easier, as many do. He invented them to make expression more controllable and unique. Ironically, his fingerings are often trickier. They require more time and more care, and they don't allow a super quick tempo, like in this etude, for example, where he suggests to use 2, 5, 1, 4, and then he switches to a standard fingering 1, 4, 2, 5, 1, 1, 2, 4, 5. But almost each arpeggio he starts with 2, 5, 1, 3. So here you have this tricky leap from 5 to 1. 5-1, which is actually tricky. That's why it needs time. That's why you naturally would want to play the first beat kind of with care, a little bit slower, just to make sure that it works with this bizarre fingering. And paradoxically, this extra time is exactly what makes his interpretation unique. Now, I have to say that this is a very tricky fingering to learn because it confuses my brain so much that I really don't want to relearn this piece with Pachmann's fingering. And I'm not sure why he wanted to start this piece with the second finger, most likely because he wanted to avoid this strain on the wrist, which you can feel if you play with the thumb. So the second finger is more natural in this position. But for healthy pianists who don't have any particular problems or carpal syndrome, the standard fingering is not a problem, basically. So I think that this fingering is a good experiment, a nice experiment, but I don't think that it's optimal for everyone. One thing he said that I fully agree with regarding piano technique is that excessive wrist motion is not helpful. So the wrist should not work. There should not be any effort in the wrist. So even if you see some motion in the wrist, for example, in my playing, it is not that the wrist is working that I am tensing up my wrist. It is simply relaxed and connected. The real motion begins in the elbow or shoulder. So I just raise my forearm with a relaxed wrist. And this is where you might see some motion in the wrist. But it doesn't mean that I really work with this wrist. But of course, I have to say that Pachmann, during his late years, probably was much more reductionist and much more fanatic in reducting all the motions than me or any other living pianist. His pedaling is very subtle and very nuanced. Often he keeps the pedal deep enough to fill the texture with overtones. Sometimes he doesn't even fully clear between harmonies, between the bars. And I'm absolutely sure that he's doing this on purpose in order to create a soft, impressionistic color blend when different harmonies, like, slightly overlap. So I would suggest you to listen to the full recording of this piece and try to identify where he uses this harmony overlapping effect. And listen how subtle he does it, so that it never sounds like a blur, like a bad pedal change. It sounds actually as just a very light, very transparent, impressionist effect. But then, suddenly, he removes the pedal entirely and gives us a crisp, pearly sound. And one of the most delightful things about this interpretation is how he treats the top note of each figure. He doesn't attack it, he doesn't bump into it as it is common today. So he doesn't do any of that. He almost asks permission from the key before playing it. It's like he's approaching the last note and asks it, like, may I play you? I promise to be gentle. The result result is refinement and nobility instead of brilliance. And this is exactly what a true bel canto technique is about. When you shape a wave upwards, creating this pull, this development, some crescendo, but the very peak, the very last note is not loud. Because you want to sing the last interval before the turn with care. Luckily, we have a few seconds of video footage of Pachmann playing. It appears briefly in the documentary The Golden Age of the Piano, but even those few moments are fascinating. Look at how minimal and economical his movements are. There is almost no wasted motion. Everything seems reduced to the essential gesture. In this clip, he plays with rather flat fingers, and he uses like a deeper part of his finger pillows here. Of course, that does not mean he uses this position in every piece, but here it fits his concept of direct contact with the key, and of course it's very suitable for romantic music like Chopin. I especially enjoy how he takes chords on an uplifting motion. He activates the fingertips to catch the key, and at the same time the forearm slightly rises. Yeah? So this is a very important technique which must be mastered by all piano players, because we use it all the time, especially when we have leaps. Yeah? You have to master this technique of grasping the key with your fingertips, but at the same time moving your forearm either up or maybe towards the next direction following a curved trajectory. And from experience, I know that many intermediate and beginner piano players struggle with this concept when the finger has to move down, but the forearm has to move up simultaneously. That's why you can do this very simple exercise. Play anything, like any scale or any spot from your piece, and develop this jumping off gesture. Because this is a very important concept, a very important skill, and Pachmann does it extremely elegantly. So it creates a feeling of buoyancy, as if the sound is released upward rather than pressed downward. Very elegant and very controlled. And here comes a delightful twist to his story, because Pachmann is actually part of cartoon history. According to Niall Strauss, in his book, when Tom from Tom&Jerry plays Liszt's second Hungarian Rhapsody in the famous 1947 cartoon Cat Concerto, his finger and wrist movements were modeled after Vladimir de Pachmann. Now, you may notice that Tom's movements are wildly exaggerated. Huge arm swings, violent wrist snaps, raising fingers extremely high. Watching it makes your hands hurt. And I really beg you, never ever imitate the technique of Tom in this cartoon, because it's extremely unhealthy. So how is it possible that the most exaggerated cartoon performance was inspired by one of the most efficient pianists in history? Arbiter Records, who have done extensive research on Pachmann, offer a very interesting explanation. They suggest that Pachmann developed his ultra-efficient method later in life. According to them, in his 60s, he suffered from muscular fatigue, pain, and a decline in technical ability. And this forced him to rethink and rebuild his entire technique, eliminating all the unnecessary effort. So it is quite possible, actually, that in his younger years he played in a much more eccentric and physically demanding way, and when nature finally sent him a warning, he responded with radical refinement. That might explain why he became so much obsessed with minimizing motion. If that's true, efficiency was not an aesthetic preference, it was rather survival. He once said, "Beethoven and Brahms I would throw into the chimney as far as their piano compositions are concerned." He respected their orchestral works a lot, and he actually admitted that Beethoven was one of the greatest and most revolutionary composers. but claimed they did not write properly for the piano, that their pieces are not pianistic, that they're not comfortable to play. Despite the fact, actually, that he himself played a great many of pieces by these composers, including at least half of Beethoven's sonatas. So here I agree to disagree, because thousands of pianists play these works naturally and with ease. So we must be careful not to confuse our own physiology or preferences with universal truth. For example, just recently I told a colleague, a fellow pianist, that for me personally, Chopin's a so-called ocean etude feels easy and natural. And my friend replied, "Oh, for me, it's actually terribly awkward." So this is the point. Our hands are different, our bodies are different. That does not necessarily mean that the composer was wrong. He also had very strong technical beliefs. For example, he said, "I do not use the first finger in delicate passages. It is too heavy. I use the middle finger instead." And this is very interesting, and many piano teachers and pianists warn that the first finger, the thumb, is like an elephant. It's really heavy. And I also make this warning quite often, but I personally developed what I call a lazy thumb technique. So I can play the thumb as tenderly as I wish, so I do not share this concern. About trills in Chopin's music, he said, "Bend the first finger until it is the length of the thumb, then trill almost on the nail." Apparently, he called the second finger the first, and the thumb he called the thumb. So, as far as I understand, what he suggests is to curl the second finger, so it would be of the same length as the thumb, and then you trill almost on the nail of the second finger, like this. But apparently, it worked beautifully on lighter 19th century pianos. But on modern instruments, actually, in Chopin, I prefer to do different trills, where I would use rather flattened fingers and more freedom in the arm. Something like that. But this kind of approach, for me, is more suitable for Bach or maybe Beethoven, where you really want to provide a very crispy, very clear, well-articulated trill. And about Bach, he famously said, "Technically, Bach is now better played than ever, but the spirit of his work remains unchanged. It demands the same spirit in its interpretation now that it has always done. There is no new way of playing it, no matter what is said about a modern interpretation." And for me personally, this is a perfect example of how even great musicians can present subjective opinions as universal truth. First of all, I'm quite sure that in the 19th century, or the beginning of the 20th century, Bach was actually played very differently from how it was played in his own time. In fact, I suspect that today we probably know more about performing Bach authentically thanks to the rigorous research behind what we call historically informed performance practice, which has formed during the last 30-40 years. So we might have actually a well better idea how to play Bach authentically the way it was played in the 18th century than many 19th century musicians did, who were often viewing Bach through the romantic salon traditions of their own time. Another point is that Pachmann would probably have been shocked by Glenn Gould, who revolutionized Bach with his highly eccentric, unapologetically non-authentic, yet extremely convincing and so far legendary staccato approach. So yet Bach survives everything: romantic rubato, salon pedaled approach, dry articulation and a lot of staccato, jazz transformation, and newer covers. That flexibility is exactly why his music is genius. So overall, Vladimir de Pachmann is a fascinating pianist and personality worth studying. So let me know what you think about him, and let me know which pianists you would like me to analyze next. Thank you for watching this, and see you next time.